Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Colby Fenster. I'm the head of Handel's Customer Relations Department, and today I'll be going over how the standard RightTrack ICW module is designed to answer and track information in relation to the BIA quarterly and annual report. Just a little bit of background information about me before we get started. I've been with Handel for over 7 years now and currently manage 20 plus clients with a variety of departments using RightTrack. Several of them fill out the BIA quarterly and annual report, and it's one of those things we've really tried to focus on in making it an easy thing to manage and do in the system. So before we kind of get into actually how the system tracks the report and all the data and everything, I just want to quickly kind of review the report and go over it. If everyone's not aware, the BIA did release a new version of this report earlier this year. So if you are unaware of that, just make sure if you type in BIA ICW quarterly and annual report, you should be able to get the newest version. And essentially, you'll just want to make sure the expiration date is for 2024. I think the old report had an expiration date of 2021. And so essentially with the new version of the report, they've just expanded on some of the information that they're wanting to track, and we'll kind of go over some of those changes and everything. But yeah, essentially the report's broken out into two sections. We have part A, which is more about the ICW data. You know, this is where you're going to track your number of referrals that you received, of those that you ended up acting on or providing services to. You know, how many kind of fit in with these different categories. They also want to know how many you had to turn away. And then they also added the total number of ICW workers and stuff. And then in terms of other new things that are added, I think before, for regards to placements, they only used to ask about relatives and native and non-native foster homes. They've now added these questions 7 and 8 here, where they want to track placements for group homes or residential facilities, as well as if the child actually ends up remaining in the home. And then for placement funding source, that's kind of tied into when you do have a placement, where is that funding coming from? In the past, I think the old report just had Title 4E, BIA Child Assistance, and other. They've since added a new option that is now state. From there, we can scroll on down to part B of the report, which there is some overlap between both sections and everything. Again, they're wanting to know how many referrals were received during the quarter. They've broken it out into substantiated and unsubstantiated referrals, as well as they've added a new option for pending referrals, which essentially, from my interpretation, has meant, you know, they could be one of those referrals you get at the very end of the quarter where maybe the investigation hasn't been completed, but you received it, and so you don't know if it's substantiated or unsubstantiated. They did also add some more definitions here on substantiated and unsubstantiated of what they, I guess, determine or what they want for these data points. The only unfortunate part is if we go down to where the definitions are, where they kind of explain a little bit more information, there's not anything additional in regards to what actually they mean by court's involvement, or for unsubstantiated, you know, case closed, no action taken. But we'll kind of go over that and kind of how we interpret it, and how, working with my various clients, we've kind of come up with a set way to get that information. And then the other thing I was just going to mention real quick before we get started as well, they have the ability to, they've added a couple of new abuse types, as well as what we call kind of involving. So psychological abuse and verbal abuse are new options, are new data points we want to track, as well as if we go down to the bottom section here, if there was human trafficking involved at all, that's a new data point. And then they've also expanded drugs and or inhalants. In the old report, it used to just be one option. Now it is actually broken out into prescription drugs, methamphetamine, and then drugs and or inhalants for kind of everything else. And then with that, same thing as we saw in part A for some of the placement changes and everything, those same new breakouts are now here in this report as well. The nice thing about this is a lot of the information we see in part A can be used to populate down here in part B, and vice versa. So with that, that's kind of a quick overview of the report again, and just kind of what data we're going to be looking at. And so We may be bouncing back and forth between the report as we go through the different sections in RightTrack on how RightTrack gets that information, but I'll try and do my best to, to make sure we're not bouncing around too much. So I'm going to jump over to RightTrack now, and this is going to be our ICW module. I'm on our demo site. And so the very first thing we're actually going to look at is, well, how do we track the number of referrals that were received? So those are actually going to be tracked inside of what we call a case record. And so a case record is kind of the overarching case for the entire family. And so this is kind of your binder that you would initially start with when the family first comes in for services. And then under the referrals section is where we actually track each time that that family has had a referral. So if I go in for my Fenster family case here, you can see I had a referral in 7/28 of 2022, a couple of referrals in March of 2022, and then I could go down to my status history section here, and you could kind of see that process flow where we went from a status of pending, which is when we initially received the case. We went to a status of, awaiting eligibility information. We opened it, we closed it, we then opened it again, after we were waiting double or more eligibility confirmation and things like that. So the case record is kind of the overarching piece. And then the referral section, though, is where we actually track the number of referrals. So if I want to create a new referral in the system, I'm just going to go to my tab here. And then under the referral date, I would just want to pick when I received the referral. So for this example, we're going to be looking at the report for just March 1st to March 31st in the system. And so I'm going to set this back to March so we can look and see how, as I add things, it updates the report and everything. So we'll say we got the referral on March 20th. Then under the referral type, I have the ability to specify whether it came from the state or the tribe. In this instance, I'm going to say it came from the state. And then I just need to essentially pick where did that referral come from, whether if I want to mark that it came from a specific social worker or maybe a teacher or a police department, or I could do an organization and say it came from like Wyoming Child Protective Services or whatever state agency or county agency you're working with. Once I click save, essentially that referral is now going to be in the system. And what is going to happen is we're going to assign what we call a status history to the referral. This is customizable for each client, but essentially what we do is we set a default status anytime you create a new referral in the system. For our demo site, we have it set up to be referral received because that's kind of the starting point, right? We don't necessarily know if the family is eligible or not eligible for services yet. So that kind of is that pending status that you are seeing on the BIA quarterly and annual report, as well as this is what we can look at for, like the referrals received and everything. So that, again, that's going to kind of give us section A here in part A. And then if we also go down to B, it's also going to kind of give us our answer for section B or part B and question A here as well. Then kind of looking at these next things of total number acted on and kind of total number of new non-tribal ICW notices acted on. Again, we kind of look at the status history section for these same data points. And so how it's designed essentially is as the referral progresses or as you get information about the referral, you have the ability to go in and update the status history. So if I wanted to, let's say, open this investigation, I could say, well, we got it on the 20th, and let's say we opened it that same day. Then under the status option, I could set it to something like investigation in progress. But if I found out that the children were not eligible to receive services, then essentially I would just want to pick like closed children not eligible to receive services. And then essentially our system will be able to document and say, okay, here's how many referrals that you had that entered a status of closed or something like along those lines during this reporting period. And then your answers for question C here. And then same thing for like substantiation and unsubstantiated. We'll get to that in just a second, but this would kind of be that initial walkthrough of, okay, I got my referral. It's now in progress. We're going to investigate. We are able to determine we were able to provide services. Now we're just trying to figure out what type of abuse and everything occurred. So with that, before we kind of get into those other parts now, I'm just going to show, well, okay, how am I going to see this report though? How do I kind of track this information as I'm entering it? And that's going to be under our report section. So essentially in RightTrack, we have two kinds of reports. We have global reports, which look at the entire database for information. That's going to be the BIA report. And then we also have contextual reports, which look at specific objects and are only going to show information about that specific object. So for example, here on the referral I'm on, I have a contextual report, so I can get a report that's only going to show me information about this referral I'm on. And then our global reports are found under our actions tab. And then you'll see there's a reports drop down, and you'll see I have one called BIA quarterly and annual report. So if I want to click on that, essentially I can run that, and this is going to look a little scary at first. You know, there's a lot of data on the table. You may be wondering, what am I actually seeing here and everything? And that's just kind of where we have different parameters and everything to help you control what you're seeing to get the information you need. And so if you look up here at the top, these are all of the different parameter options that you have. So for my date range, like I mentioned, we're only going to look at the month of March. If you're wanting to look at an entire quarter, you would just update this to be the quarter that you're looking at. If you wanted to look at look at the data for an entire year, you also have the ability to do that as well. The nice thing about that is you can kind of proactively check your data throughout the quarter instead of having that mad scramble at the end of the reporting period or during the reporting period where you're needing staff to go through all their case files or their Excel documents and compile some of this information. So what I'm going to look at then is let's kind of see just those referrals that were received during the reporting period. So the first thing I want to be able to filter on is my case record types. And so if you're an agency that also offers like adult protective services or other types of services, you may not want those type of cases to be in the system. So for this example, I'm only going to make our child protective services cases visible. Then under the referral types, again, if I wanted to differentiate my state or tribal data, I can do that as well. Otherwise, I can include both referral types in the report. And then we get to our status history section where you see I kind of have everything checked off for the moment. So if I only wanted to look at my referrals received initially, I'm going to uncheck all of these other options and make sure only referral received is the status history type that I have selected. Now when I review the report, you'll see my table looks way less scary and everything, and I can see my data of during the month of March, it looks like we've had 5 state referrals that were received, and then I've had 2 tribal referrals that were received. And then the total value down here gives me an overall total, so I can see that number is 7. And so then I would know I had 7 new referrals during this reporting range. And then if I wanted to see, again, some of that other information, let's say I also want to see how many cases were closed, because we weren't able to provide services to them, then I could expand the parameter option to also include that. And then when I review my report, again, now I can see how many were closed. And so for this example, it looks like we only have 1 that was a state case that entered, state referral, and it was children not eligible to receive services. So that's essentially how RightTrack gives you that ability to kind of control what you're seeing. And then if there is other information or you want to distinguish information that's not necessarily asked for in the BIA report for your own internal use, you can do that. So I'm going to now close out of this, and we're going to go back to the referral piece, and we'll kind of go and look at the report now of kind of those remaining sections. So for total number of acted on, again, usually those are referrals that end up entering a status of like substantiation or something like that. And then we need to track all of these different things, inside of the referral and things like that that have happened. So the first thing is, well, how are we going to track what was considered, participated in a state court hearing, which essentially from our interpretations mean there was a state court case associated with it and there was a hearing during the quarter. So that information is actually going to be tracked on the case record itself. So if I go back to our case record real quick, you'll see we have a court cases node on the left-hand side here. And then this is where I have the ability to go in and enter in a court case. So this is a case that you see I've entered in previously. So if this family has a new court case, I'm going to be able to go in here. Again, I'm going to say it's a state court case. I could say it's, depending if you use CHIPS or child in need of aid cases, or there's guardianship cases or anything like that. For this example, I'm going to use a CHIPS case. For the court, I could indicate it's going to be the 2nd Judicial District of Albany County or wherever the court is. And then under the case number, I would be able to just type in that case number. So for this example, I'll say the case number format is the year or the last 2 digits of the year. We'll do chips since it's a chips case, and then maybe it's dash and then 03 for the month, and then another dash, and then it's the 9th case in that month. So, that's kind of our case number. Then we have our start dates and end dates, and we'll come back to this in just a second on kind of what this means, but the start date is really kind of that petition date. And so again, if this came from the state and it's tied to a state court case, it probably happened around the same time that we got the referral. So I'm just going to set the start date to March 20th. Then I'm going to click save, and you're going, great, we have the court case, but that again asks for hearings. Where do we enter hearings? Well, you'll now notice we have a hearing section here on the left-hand side. And so for hearings, this is where I could go in and document that we had a court hearing. So for this example here, I can go in and say, there was a hearing on the 23rd of March, and we'll say it happened at 10:30 a.m. For the hearing type, I could say, maybe it was an adjudicatory or an emergency hearing, fact-finding, whatever, it may classify as, specify the courtroom, which I'll just say it was courtroom A for this case. And then you'll see here, you have a related case record section. So this essentially allows you to tie it to the case record for the family, and then it allows you to pick what case number you want to tie it to as well. So for this example, I'm going to tie it to my CHIPS case I just made. So now, as soon as I have that hearing created, that's now going to appear on the report when it comes to how many cases we had participating in a state court hearing. So if I go back to my Actions tab real quick, click on Reports, and we run it again, if I go down here and look at case record referral hearings, you can see here I have, 2 state court hearings. And again, like I mentioned, the reports are designed to maybe give you some more information than what the BIA necessarily asks for, but you do have that ability of, let's say I don't want to see the tribal hearings and stuff, I can go up here to the parameter and say, okay, I only want to see state court cases. So then I'm only going to pick state and review my data. And if you're going, great, well, how do I know though RightTrack's actually calculating that information, or what data is being tracked? Why is this 2? How is it getting to? The nice thing about that is we have what we call breakout tables for each of these sections. So you'll see here I have a parameter that says check to hide breakout. If I uncheck that option and then view the report again, essentially under each question, RightTrack is going to give you some of the raw data on how it's getting its numbers. So I could quickly look up here and go, okay, well, I want to see which case was my closed children not eligible to receive services. If I expand that breakout option, I can go down here and easily see that information. It also makes it nice because each of these raw data tables has filters on it and everything. So if I want to look again and say, I want to find my closed case, I can type in closed up here and it will automatically filter those results for me. So if we scroll down now where we get into talking about how many cases participated in a state court hearing, you'll see I have my breakout table here of 2. And then these are the 2 unique records that are accounting for that. So again, that makes it very nice if you're trying to compare data into RightTrack to either an alternative reporting method you have, whether that be an Excel sheet or pen and paper, or the numbers just don't seem to line up with what you think they are. Oftentimes when I'm working with my clients, they can easily say, well, no, I know we had 8 new referrals this month. Why is RightTrack only showing there's 7? Well, then we're able to go in and easily see which 7 are RightTrack's reporting on, compare it to that list of the 8 that they're saying were received that month, and then we can find out what the issue is. Did somebody accidentally put the wrong date for the referral date and they put it in a different quarter or a different year, which tend to be the most common issues, or did it just not get entered into the system, or did it classify as something else actually? So those are the nice kind of things, again, that having an online system, not necessarily RightTrack, but just an online system in general for your case management, you can do those types of things proactively, and again, instead of at the end or during the reporting period. So with that now, we're going to jump to kind of, again, the next section here, where we're going to track participation in case planning. This is one that's pretty open to interpretation from my work with my various clients and everything. For our standard system, we essentially have a case plan functionality on the case record. And so how we interpret that is if they have a case plan that was created during the date range or for the referral, then obviously we can count that as case planning. Usually though, that can be a lot more. So we can obviously work with you on making sure what you determine or what you quantify or classify case planning as showing up on your report and is accurately being tracked. But for this example, I would essentially on my case record, go ahead and create a case plan. Again, I could say that was created for the family, maybe the following week. What type of case plan was it? Is it something for the parents? Is it something for the family overall? Give it a name. I could say this is going to be the Colby Fenster case plan if I'm creating it for an individual parent. And then again, you have the ability inside the case plan, and I'm just going to open it in a new tab real quick, to track things like who the participants are, what goals do you have for the case plan, what are going to be the action items or the steps that the person needs to achieve, as well as other things like documents if you need to upload a copy of the signed case plan, if you want to take any notes on the case plan, or as the parent works on completing it, you have that functionality as well. But that's kind of a quick synopsis of how RightTrack, and at least with the standard functionality, populates this question 2 here of how many participated in case planning. Then for the next piece, we're going to look at transferred to tribal court. So how many cases either started with the state and end up being transferred to your tribal court. We're actually going to go back to the court cases tab that we were looking at earlier. So for this example here, you'll know that I have a end date / transfer date, as well as a checkbox to indicate whether it was transferred to tribal court or not. So in this instance, let's say it was transferred to tribal court shortly after it was opened. So it was opened on the 20th, let's say on the 23rd, it ended up being closed or transferred. Then all I have to do is make sure I check this box and hit save. And now when I go run the report, we're going to show we had one case that was transferred to tribal court. So again, I'll go run the report real quick. And again, if we scroll down now to the cases where we had a transfer to tribal court, you can see the case I just made here where it was a CHIPS case and it was transferred on 3/23/2023. Same thing here, you can see some of the other data I've entered to kind of make this, so it's not just ones and zeros as we're going through it. I also had another case that was transferred on 3/12. This also kind of ties in real quick to the bottom section here of question 9, where it says transferred to tribal court and case managed by the tribe. Essentially similar to the same functionality, we can kind of track those transfer dates, and then we also kind of have the case type. So if we go back up to the parameters up here where I was talking about, do we want to know if they came from the state? Is it our tribal court or is it another tribal court? You have the parameter options to go through here and kind of filter on what you're wanting to look at, and then you'll be able to get that information. And then the next piece is going to be what I skipped over, which is going to be all of the placement information. So this is essentially looking at, okay, for these referrals, where did we end up placing the child? So this is actually tracked then on a person. And so people are linked to a case via this involved parties node. And so I'm going to open up a new tab real quick and we'll go to a person record. So let me go see who I have as a child real quick. We'll do Clay Fenster as my child. So on my person record, and this is kind of where we store all the demographic information for a person, as well as you can see we track things like contact information, medical information. Background can do things like their tribal affiliation, relationships they have, markings, aliases, all that type of stuff. But the one we're going to care about on this person screen is actually going to be under case activity. And you'll see we have a placement section. So on this placements node is what we call it. This is where I would be able to document different placements that the child has. So if I wanted to add one, I would just click on our add button here, and then I'm going to indicate who I want to place them with. Essentially, RightTrack gives you 3 options. You can place them with a person. That would be used when you want to place them with a relative or let's say their parents because they're remaining in the home. You can use an organization if it's a residential or treatment center. And then foster home would be if they're actually placing them with a foster home. So for this example, I'm going to say we're going to place Clay with a foster home here, and then I would have my option to pick which foster home I want to add or place them in. For this example, I'm going to use the Emily and Tyler Maldonado placement, and then under my placement type, this is where I can actually specifically say what they are. And so this makes it nice. So if you ever have a weird instance where somebody's getting placed with a relative, but the relative is also a foster home, you can kind of set up your data however you want in terms of how you track that information. But the report here is going to look at this placement type section. So for this example, if I wanted to say Emily and Tyler are a native foster home, I'm going to indicate that. And then you'll also see we have a funding source, which I'll probably get to in just a second, but we can kind of cover that now probably anyways. So this, if we scroll down here where we get to the placement funding source, this is exactly where we're able to determine that information as well. So if I want to say the funding source is from the state, I can do that. And then again, with my foster care placement here, I could say the child ended up being placed there on the 28th or something of March. Then I would just click the Save button, and now we have record of that placement. And so again, if I go now and run my report and everything, and I want to go look at my placements, I can scroll down to the bottom here, and where we get to the placements, you can see I have a breakout here of the different types of referrals I have and the different areas where they've been placed. So essentially, again, we can try and give you more numbers than what you may want to see on the report. For this option, we would look at the number of placements. And so essentially that tells us, there were 3 placements tied to 2 referrals, and essentially the difference between there, that just means one of these referrals had multiple kids that ended up being placed in a native foster home. And again, if I scroll down to my raw data, I can kind of see that information. And again, here we go. We have Clay Fenster's, foster home record with a native foster home. And again, if you have parameters and things like that, right now I have all my different options selected. So let's say it's not even during the reporting period, but you want to just look at some other numbers. You can easily go in here and say, I only want to look at our foster home placements. I don't want to look at the other information. Then you just review the report. And I'm going to actually go back here real quick to, okay, we do have it all set up. And then again, it's now going to show me just the information that I had picked. So that can be a great way, again, to kind of get different information based off what you're looking for and everything like that. And then, like I said, we'll kind of skip down to the total 7 section here. Again, for placement funding source, if we keep scrolling down, this is actually going to be near the bottom of the report, but this is where, again, I can see here's my breakout. It looks like I have 2 that were for BIA child assistance, 4 were for the state. And again, I have my raw data here where I can kind of figure out, yep, it was Clay being placed with this individual or this foster home, and this is when that placement started. So again, it's really nice and easy to go through and kind of compare your data, and hopefully those numbers should kind of match and align, because it's often one of those things, theoretically the total you have for this section should be the total down here and everything, and so that can just be a great way to make sure that data is accurate and matches, and you don't have any discrepancies. And then the last question, which is total number of ICW workers. This is one most of the clients actually just know themselves. It's not really a necessity for right track to track or anything, but we do anyways. And essentially on a case record, back under the involved party section here, where we kind of list everyone, you can see I've listed Casey here as the caseworker. And so that's kind of how we're able to know, Casey was an active caseworker during the reporting period. We don't just look that they had a new case, we look if they were active at any point, and then you can kind of easily get that information. So if you have staff that leave throughout the year or throughout a quarter or hire new staff, those are things you can easily forget about, but RightTrack will make sure that, the original staff and the new staff are both being counted as well. So that's kind of a brief overview, again, of this whole section A of the ICW quarterly and annual report. And now we get to move to section B. And the nice thing is like I mentioned earlier, there is quite a bit of overlap between the two sections. So a lot of this may be me repeating myself, but it doesn't hurt to kind of see a refresher again of where the data is coming from. And the nice thing too, if you have any questions, you're always more than welcome to reach out to your PM, and they should be able to help you kind of sift through the data and make sure you understand it, as well as your staff understand why entering good data is important and how it helps in the bigger picture, or in regards to a bigger picture ordeal. So with that, like I mentioned, for referrals and everything, and tracking the number of referrals that we received, that's going to be done via the status history section. And again, you would just look and see how many, where you had a status of referral received or whatever your default status was. And again, if you need to filter these out because you don't want to consider state referrals in this, you only want to consider tribal referrals or vice versa, you would just use the parameter options to easily filter that data. And then for substantiation and unsubstantiation, and I should say pending, we used to have some other logic, but with the new updates, we've kind of found it's easier to just track it via the status history. So again, if I want to say that this was substantiated, how we've recommended our clients use it going forward is I would essentially go through and say, okay, on the 29th of March, it was determined, our investigation was completed and our results were, it was substantiated. Now, when I click save, again, you can kind of see that historical process of when we received the referral, when we opened the investigation, and when we completed it. And then I'm going to jump to our other tab here, and we'll scroll back up to the top. And if, let me go in and change our status options here to be like investigation complete, investigation, substantiated, unsubstantiated. If I refresh my data, you can kind of go through here. And again, I can see, okay, we had 4 state cases where it was ended up being substantiated, 1 tribal case, and then we have a total value right here for a value, or for 5. And then I can go look at our unsubstantiated ones. And again, since there's only 1 here, our totals are only going to show 1. And, you can kind of see the breakouts and stuff. So again, totally understand this can look a little intimidating when you first look at it, because there's a lot of numbers being displayed and everything, but it's essentially just showing you every kind of possible combination of data so you can get your different results should you want to use it for other uses than just what the report is asking for. And then the next piece is going to be actually tracking what type of abuse or things that were involved in this, the actual incident, I should say. So these are things like sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, psychological abuse, etc. And then also these bottom 2 options of domestic violence involved and human trafficking involved. And essentially where that's tracked in RightTrack is we have an incident section. So the incident section is to track, what, as a part of the referral, what was alleged to have happened at a certain time. And if there's multiple incidents in the referral, you have the ability to document that. So for this example, I'm going to go in and I'll say the incident happened, I think we made the referral come in on Monday. So let's say the incident happened late Sunday night. It was 11:30 p.m. Then I can indicate who I want the alleged perpetrator to be. In this example, I think I made myself a parent in the case. Or let me go back to my case real quick and I'll see who we have for involved parties. I just want to have it make a little bit more sense. Okay, so under my parents here, it looks like I made Alicia Sullivan our parent. So I'm going to say or pretend she was the perpetrator in this instance as well. I can fill out my location, whether that be an actual street address or more of a generic or general description, and then I would be able to hit save. Once you have that incident created, you actually have to open it up, and then you'll see there's a findings section in here where you can add all of your findings. And so the nice thing is you can easily just go through. I can say there was alcohol involved. It was a part of the initial referral. I got to set the finding. So this is essentially to remind staff to enter good data. So you can track, okay, alcohol was substantiated, but maybe another type of abuse was not substantiated. Overall, the entire thing is still substantiated, but you could actually get data then on what was actually substantiated versus not. So if there was human trafficking involved, for example, but that was a part of the claim, but it ended up not being true, I would be able to go in and set all of that up, and again, distinguish that alcohol was present, but not human trafficking. And then I could go in again and just kind of add each of these options here based off what, I'm kind of expecting, or again, what was kind of referred and stuff. And so then how this ties in is essentially the report, again, goes and looks for any referrals that were received during the reporting period, goes and looks for any incidents, and then for those incidents, it goes through and kind of gives you a running total for each of the types of abuse, or what we qualify as involving in relation to the incident. And so if I then go back to this report again, and again, I scroll down now to the bottom, or closer to the bottom, you'll see we kind of have a findings section where, again, you can kind of see substantiated and unsubstantiated overall. And then if we go to the findings type, or of abuse/involving, I can easily get my numbers here and go, okay, it looks like we had 2 state referrals involving alcohol, 4 for child neglect. I could combine that with my tribal ones to get a total of 5. I can see my domestic violence numbers, human trafficking, physical abuse, etc., and kind of get all of that information in a relatively easy format. And so again, you would just be able to take your numbers on the right-hand side. Depending on how you want to report on your data, you could combine them, or we could give you a way that they're already combined for you. And then you would just plug them in here for each of those sections. And then this is where I was going to kind of tie it to the end, but I'll bring it up here. So this is another advantage of hopefully having a system, and maybe specifically RightTrack. For our clients that were using our ICW module when the new report came out, there's a couple of questions initially of, well, how do we start tracking this new data, right? Is there a lot of customization that needs to be done to now track things like verbal abuse or psychological abuse? Or is that something that's kind of just easy to add into the system so that we can start tracking that information? And the nice thing is, it's really easy to add. All we had to do for our clients was just go to our findings section here, and then under this drop-down value, we just have an add button here where I can put in my new type of abuse or involving that I want to track. So essentially all we did for their systems is I just logged in with my admin functionality, and we quickly added psychological abuse, verbal abuse, and then the prescription drugs, methamphetamine, etc. And the nice thing is as well, you could already start tracking some of this information beforehand if you want. So I have a client that was actually really interested in knowing what types of drugs that were involved with their referrals that they were receiving. So while they were using drugs and/or inhalants, they on their own system were already tracking things like prescription drugs and methamphetamine, and I think heroin and fentanyl was the other ones they wanted to track. And so if that was something they were kind of already tracking that data for the report. And that gives you, again, they weren't using it for the BIA, but they were using it for more of their own internal uses. So if I go back here and let's say I do want to track heroin, for example, I spelled that right. That's all you have to do. Now it's a new drop-down. It's going to plug in seamlessly with the report. So if I, again, now just say this was substantiated as well and click Save, and I go back and just rerun my report, and I scroll down to the section where we see all that information again, I can now see heroin as an option. So that's, again, kind of those advantages of as these reports change and everything, make sure you have a system that allows you to dynamically change or grow with them, because it cuts down on time. And the last thing you want to have to do is obviously wait, 6 months for a release or whatnot to get the new data points, and then have to worry about back entering information and all that type of stuff. Specifically with RightTrack, we really try and make things pretty dynamic. So as these things are changed or updated, you don't necessarily have to do a whole lot, or it's very easy for us to adapt. So with that, like I mentioned, that kind of covers all of these sections here from E through K, and then also we get like T and U down here at the bottom. The next section kind of tracks recurring cases. And so essentially how we look at that is, has the family had a referral before? And so when we first went to my case record for the Fenster family, you saw there was 3 or 4 previous referrals. And so that's how we just check to make sure that they qualify under this reoccurring cases section. We just go and see if they have a previous referral than the one that's falling in that reporting period. And I may just have to scroll up to find that, or scroll down to find that section. Recurring cases, here we go. And again, you can see my Fenster family case, and you can see all of the different referrals that I previously had, and the different number of cases and everything. And since I had 4 referrals, you know, it's going to list each one of those in the data here, but overall for my total, it's still only going to count it as once. So that's a nice thing where you kind of get, again, more of the raw data, but for the report and everything, we do put in those checks to only give you maybe what the report is asking. And then the next thing is going to be cases of siblings involved, right? So how do we track that information? Kind of jumping back where I can go to our participants section here, you know, I can see that we have our different roles here. Well, how do I want to link that these 2 may be siblings or not? And that's essentially done on the person record, where we can have what we call their relationships. So I'm going to go back to Clay's record real quick. We are looking at adding some hyperlinks to make it a little faster to get to. But essentially under background, we have a relationship section. And so this is just where I would want to go in and document that, let's say, I think it was Molly and Clay are siblings. And so you have the ability, I can go in, find Molly. Then under my relationship type, we can do a variety of different options. Some clients just do things like sibling and sibling. Other clients want to do things like biological brother and biological sister, or half brother and half sister, or stepbrother and stepsister, right? There's tons of different options that we can set it up as. It's really up to you to decide what makes sense and how detailed you want to get. For this example, I could say they're going to be biological brother and biological sister. You'll see here in the context situation, it will kind of tell you how RightTrack is reading that relationship. So in this case, it's saying Molly is the biological brother, which I could say that's incorrect. And then I just have to click the swap person button and it will flip the context for me. And so I know that Molly Sullivan's biological brother is Clay. Then I could go through and just say, you know, we became aware of this information on 3/20/23. I'll click save. And then that's essentially how we're able to look at how many referrals had a sibling that was involved in it. And if I go back to our report now, and let me go to BIA. And again, and I clicked on the wrong thing. There will be a section in here for cases and referrals involving siblings. And again, you can kind of go through the raw data here and we'll show you all of those sibling pairs. So for example, again, with the Wilcox family, they have 3 children. So Ashley and Alex are siblings, Alex and Aaron are siblings, and then also Ashley and Aaron are siblings. And so that's, you know, going to be the raw data of 3 different times, but again, we're only going to count their case once in the system, or once in our numbers up here. One other thing I will mention with this, if you're like, yeah, that's a lot of scrolling to jump around and everything, we can always split out this report into smaller sections and everything like that, so it's not so overwhelming when you're going into it. But it's just one of those preference things of some people really like to see it all in one giant report. Others prefer the more broken out version and stuff. And you can work with your project manager on deciding what works best for you in regards to the data or how you want to see your data. And then the last thing we'll kind of cover are placements, which again, we kind of already touched on earlier. That's going to be under the person placement section up here on a person. So under case activity, again, we're just going to look at the placement type here and be able to get you that information. And again, it's one of those things where this information is probably going to be tracked or need to be documented anyways. And so we kind of design it in a way that as your staff are kind of just entering this information as a part of their general entry or data entry process, that information is getting entered into the system. It's not like they have to enter it and then go do something special to make it tracked. It's just a part of it when they go to add it initially in the system. From there, we can then also look at petitions to tribal court, and that is going to bring us back to our lovely case record tab. So let me actually go back to our case record now, or I should say our court cases tab that we've kind of looked at for transferred to, or how many were transferred to tribal court and everything. We essentially look at the exact same thing here, and it would again just be looking at how many cases had a start date during the reporting range. So again, you can kind of get some overlap if you wanted to look at state cases too. But for our example, I could say it's going to be a tribal case. Again, I'll say it's going to be a CHIPS, and then this time it would be our tribal court. So I don't know, we'll say it's the Native Village of Barrow tribal court, and then this is going to be like a 4.1.1 CHIPS 23001. And then I could say again, their start date was 3/28/2023. So that's essentially how we can track then how many cases ended up being transferred to tribal court. We look at kind of the case source and can get you that information. And then the last piece again here is the total number of child protection or child welfare workers, which essentially we also answered above here in section A. And so like I mentioned, it kind of looks at that involved parties node, and we just track how many users, different users have been tied to a case. So with that, that's kind of an overall reach or a breakdown of how RightTrack's designed to populate and track the information in relation to this report. And then kind of how we're interpreting some of the questions and everything. Obviously, we can always modify the report or logic to match things if you interpret things a little bit differently. We've ran into that with a couple of these questions, not that anybody's necessarily right or wrong. We just need more detail through the BIA to get some of these questions answered and stuff. But with that, I see we have several attendees, so I was going to open it up to any questions or anything. I think you should hopefully be able to type it in the chat, and I'll give everyone a minute or two to type any questions they may have, or if there's anything you'd like me to review again, I'm more than happy to do that as well. Other than that, and while I'm having everyone type, I'll just kind of maybe go over some of those more specific reports again. So like I mentioned, if you don't want all of your placement information in one giant report that you have to scroll to, that's where we'll do things like active person placement statistics or, active person placements. And you can essentially go through here. It's designed to give you that exact same information that the BIA report's kind of looking for. But since it's a different report and it's more specific, we can do cool things like different charts and different tables and everything. And to kind of give you a little bit more of a visualization to your data in case you are wanting to present to a council or another board or another agency or something like that, or you are kind of looking on a presentation of your own and stuff. So this is an example of some of those other placements that or other type of reports that we can do and how we're able to show that information and stuff. So with that though, it looks like I don't see any questions so far in the chat. So I appreciate everyone joining us today and hope it was educational and seeing how RightTrack again can track and manage your data for the BIA quarterly and annual report. Thank you everyone.